The morning I turned 18, the sky over Cedar Valley looked like it couldn't decide between winter and spring. Gray clouds hung low, and the wind carried that particular scent of melting snow mixed with institutional bleach. I stood on the cracked concrete steps outside Cedar Valley Group Home, with everything I owned stuffed into a black garbage bag. The plastic rustled against my leg, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a whole life could fit inside something meant for trash. Through the reinforced glass door, Rosie pressed her palm against the window. 12 years old, blonde hair pulled back tight the way the staff insisted, her blue eyes wide and too bright with tears she was trying not to shed. We looked alike, people always said. Same pale hair that caught gold in summer sun, same eyes the color of winter sky. But right then, what we shared most was the hollow ache of knowing this goodbye was mandatory. The rules were clear. No emotional display. Bad for routine, Ms. Rodriguez always said, as if feelings could be scheduled between breakfast and morning chores. So Rosie and I just stared at each other through that barrier of wire-embedded glass, and I mouthed the words I'd been practicing all night. 6 years. I'll have a home before you're 18. She nodded, chin trembling despite her efforts to stay brave. I wanted to believe she understood what I meant, that I wasn't abandoning her the way everyone else had, that this separation was temporary, even if 6 years felt like forever when you're 12. Ms. Rodriguez appeared behind me, her sensible shoes clicking on concrete. 40-something, perpetually tired, carrying that particular kind of exhaustion that comes from caring for too many damaged kids with too few resources. She handed me a manila envelope, corners bent from handling. Happy birthday, Clara. Your discharge papers and final stipend. I took the envelope. Inside was $437 in bills that smelled faintly of the office safe, a single sheet certifying I'd completed my time in state care, and a second envelope. This one yellowed with age, the paper soft at the creases like cloth. There was also something from your grandfather's estate. Came last week. I looked down at the aged envelope. The return address was printed in faded ink. Morrison and Blackwood, attorneys at law, Millbrook, PA. A place I'd never heard of. A connection to a past that felt more like borrowed memories than lived experience. The bag's strap cut into my shoulder as I started down the sidewalk. Behind me, Cedar Valley Group Home stood exactly as it had for the 6 years I'd lived there. Brick the color of old blood, windows that never quite let in enough light, a chain-link fence that marked the boundary between us and the rest of the world. Every step away should have felt like freedom, but my legs moved like I was walking through deep water. If I looked back, I knew I wouldn't leave. So I kept my eyes forward, on the street that would take me to the bus station, to whatever came next, to anywhere that wasn't here. The Greyhound station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that particular shade of yellowish despair common to places where people wait for transport to somewhere else. I claimed a plastic bench bolted to the floor and opened the manila envelope Ms. Rodriguez had given me. The discharge papers were bureaucratic and brief. Clara Elizabeth Thornhill, date of birth March 14th, 2006. Released from state custody upon reaching age of majority. I folded them without really reading, and turned to the older envelope. Inside was a letter, on law firm stationery, dated 3 months prior. The paper was good quality, heavy stock that resisted the crease of my thumb. Dear Ms. Thornhill, I regret to inform you of the passing of your grandfather, Augustus Thornhill, on November 3rd of this year. As executor of his estate, I am writing to notify you of a bequest in his will. The attached documents detail a property transfer of 6 acres of land in Millbrook, Pennsylvania, including 1 Quonset-style structure. The transfer fee is $10, payable upon acceptance. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to discuss the details. The property is currently unoccupied. My personal number is below, should you need immediate assistance. With sympathy, Silas Blackwood, Esquire. $10 for land. The absurdity of it made something twist in my chest. I pulled out the rest of the envelope's contents. A deed, official and legal looking. A blurry satellite photograph showing trees, snow, and a long curved shape that looked like a half-buried tin can. And, tucked at the bottom, wrapped in tissue paper so old it was turning to powder, was a small object. I unwrapped it carefully. A silver ring, simple and worn smooth with age, caught the fluorescent light. Inside the band, barely visible, were initials: E.T. plus A.G.T. My grandmother Elizabeth and grandfather Augustus. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the weight of it, the reality of metal and memory. There was one more thing. A Polaroid photograph, colors faded to pastels. In it, a tall man with silver hair and weathered hands stood next to a little girl of maybe 7. They were in a garage or workshop, surrounded by tools. The man had his hand on the girl's shoulder, while she gripped a hammer too big for her small hands. Both were smiling. On the back, in careful handwriting: Clara's first repair job, 2013. I didn't remember that day, not clearly, but I remembered the man. Grandpa Gus, who smelled like pine wood and pipe tobacco, who taught me that every structure needed a foundation, that you couldn't build anything lasting without first making sure the base would hold. Who tried to get custody of Rosie and me after the accident, but the courts said he was too old, his health too uncertain, his small pension insufficient for raising 2 grieving children. I pressed my thumb against the photograph, against that frozen moment when I'd been small enough to believe adults could fix anything. When I'd had no idea that within 5 years, both my parents would be gone, and Grandpa Gus would be fighting a losing battle with the state over whether love and carpentry skills were enough to make a home. The memory came back, sharp and unwanted. Interstate 80, middle of February, 6 years ago, black ice, slick as oil. My father trying to correct the wheel, the semi-truck's horn blaring, my mother reaching back to grab Rosie's hand, then nothing but the sound of metal tearing and my own screaming. I was 12. Rosie was 6. We survived without a scratch. Our parents died on impact. The state separated us 3 weeks later. Different group homes, different counties, visits once a month if the schedules aligned. Grandpa Gus hired a lawyer he couldn't afford and fought for a year before his heart gave him a warning, serious enough that the judge ruled against him. The last time I saw him was in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and defeat. Everything has a foundation, Clara girl. Remember that. Those were the last words he'd said to me. I'd been 13 and angry at the world, and I'd barely nodded before a social worker led me away. Now, sitting in a bus station with a deed to land I'd never seen, and a ring that had circled my grandmother's finger through 40 years of marriage, those words felt less like random comfort and more like instruction. I pulled out my phone, a cheap flip model the group home had issued for emergencies, and dialed the number Rosie had memorized. She picked up on the second ring. "Clara?" Her voice was small and hopeful in a way that made my throat tight. "I'm at the station. I got something in the mail. From Grandpa Gus's estate." I could hear her breathing, waiting. "What is it?" "Land, in some place called Millbrook, and a building, some kind of metal hut." A pause. "Like a house?" I looked at the satellite photo again. The curved structure looked less like a house and more like an oversized culvert someone had half buried in the woods. More like a can that got left in the middle of nowhere. "Does it have walls?" "I think so." "Then it's a start." The practical certainty in her voice made me smile, despite everything. She'd always been like that, finding the solid ground in any situation. I wanted to tell her about the ring, about the money they were offering me to take this land, about how scared I was of making the wrong choice. Instead, I said what she needed to hear. "I'm going to go look at it, and if it's real, if it's something we can use, I'm going to make it work. I'll come get you, Rosie. I swear it." "When?" 6 years. Before you turn 18. That's the promise. After I hung up, I sat with the phone warm in my palm and looked at the departure board. There was a bus to Harrisburg leaving in 40 minutes. From there, I could probably get to Millbrook, wherever that was. I had $437 and no other plan, no other destination. At the ticket counter, I hesitated only once. Then I slid my money across the scratched plexiglass and heard myself ask for one ticket to Harrisburg. One way. The bus pulled out of the city as afternoon light turned everything gold and fragile. Buildings gave way to neighborhoods, then suburbs, then stretches of highway lined with bare trees still waiting for spring. I leaned my forehead against the cold window and watched Pennsylvania unfold in shades of brown and gray and patient green. Somewhere around the third hour, an elderly woman settled into the seat next to me. She wore a wool coat that smelled like mothballs and lilac perfume, and she carried herself with the particular confidence of someone who'd lived long enough to stop caring what strangers thought. Heading to Harrisburg? Just passing through. Going to Millbrook. Her eyebrows rose. Millbrook? Haven't heard that name in a while. My father worked the lumber yards there back in the 60s. Town's barely got 800 people now. I turned to look at her properly. She had kind eyes, the creased kind that suggested she smiled more than she frowned. What's it like? Small, quiet. Used to be more, before the mills closed. She tilted her head, studying me with the frank assessment of someone who'd raised children and could still spot trouble at 40 paces. You got family there? Had. My grandfather left me some land. Her expression shifted to something softer. I'm sorry for your loss. What kind of land? I pulled out the satellite photo and handed it over. She examined it, lips pursed. That's up in the ridges. Remote. She tapped the curved structure. Quonset hut looks like. Military surplus, probably. They sold them off cheap after the wars. Is it worth anything? She handed the photo back with a small, knowing smile. Depends what you mean by worth. Land's always worth something to somebody. Though I'll tell you, there's been talk lately. Development company buying up properties in that area. My cousin sold hers last year. For how much? More than it was worth a year before. Less than it might be worth next year. That's how these things work. She patted my hand, her fingers thin and warm. Whatever you decide, honey, make sure it's your decision, not theirs. The bus dropped me at a junction outside Harrisburg, where another, smaller bus was scheduled to run to Millbrook twice daily. I had 3 hours to wait, so I bought terrible coffee from a vending machine and sat on a bench watching traffic blur past on the highway. When the Millbrook bus finally arrived, it was small and slightly shabby, the kind of rural transport that served towns too small for regular routes. The driver was a woman in her 50s, who greeted the handful of passengers by name. When I climbed aboard, she looked at me with polite curiosity. New to the area? Just visiting, looking at some property. She nodded, as if this made perfect sense, and pulled back onto the road. The landscape shifted from highway commercial to rural agricultural to something wilder. Woods pressed close to the narrow roads, and what houses I saw were set far back from the pavement, their windows glowing warm against the gathering dusk. Millbrook appeared without fanfare. One main street, a handful of shops, a diner with a hand-painted sign that read Bee's Place in cheerful red letters. The hardware store had a window display of gardening tools optimistically arranged despite the snow still clinging to shadows. A post office, a gas station, a building that might have been a town hall or a library. Everything looked worn but maintained, the way places do when people care enough to keep them standing, but lack the resources for more. The bus stopped in front of a storefront with Morrison and Blackwood etched into the window glass. The law office sat between a closed barber shop and a thrift store whose dusty window displayed a wedding dress from approximately 1987. I stepped off the bus into air that smelled like pine trees and wood smoke. The cold was different here, sharper and cleaner than the city. My breath came out in pale clouds. The law office door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, it was exactly what a small-town law office should be. Wood paneling, filing cabinets that predated computers, and a reception desk where a woman in her 30s looked up from a crossword puzzle. "Help you?" I'm Clara Thornhill. I have an appointment with Mr. Blackwood. Her face brightened with recognition. Oh, you're Gus's granddaughter. Silas said you might come today. She stood and gestured toward a door behind her. Go right in, honey. He's expecting you.
Silas Blackwood rose from behind a desk piled with folders and papers. 56 or so, with silver hair that suggested he'd gone gray early, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of sweater that came from a wife or long-term habit. He smiled, and it reached his eyes in a way that made something in my chest unclench slightly. Clara, I'm so glad you came. We shook hands. His grip was firm and warm. He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and I sat, the garbage bag with my possessions rustling against my leg. I was sorry to hear about your grandfather. He was a good man, one of my closest friends for nearly 30 years. Thank you. I wasn't sure what else to say. The truth was, I barely remembered Grandpa Gus beyond scattered images and the fading echo of his voice. Silas settled back into his chair and pulled out a thick folder. Let me explain the situation. Your grandfather purchased that land in 1992. Very remote parcel, no utilities, no paved road access. The structure on it is an old military Quonset hut. He paid $3,500 for the whole property at a government auction, so it's worthless. He paused, fingers steepled. In most people's estimation, yes. Then he pulled out a second folder, this one noticeably newer. However, something you should know. A development company called Summit Crest contacted me 3 weeks ago. They want your land. They've offered $22,000. The number hit me like cold water. 22,000. That was an apartment deposit. That was community college tuition. That was everything I needed to file for guardianship of Rosie, to prove I could provide stability and support. Why would anyone want it? Silas adjusted his glasses, a gesture I was starting to recognize as him choosing his words carefully. They're buying up the entire ridge, planning some kind of resort development. Cabins, private amenities. They say your land is strategically positioned. The word strategically hung in the air between us, carrying implications I couldn't quite grasp. You could sell. Sign today, walk out with a check. I imagined calling Rosie from a new apartment in some city where rent was cheap and jobs were plentiful. I got the money, I'd say. I can get you out now. It would be easy. It would be done. But then I thought about the photograph in my pocket, about Grandpa Gus's hand on my shoulder, about his last words in that hospital room. Everything has a foundation. Can I see it first? The land? Silas studied me for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You're not like most 18-year-olds. I don't have much to lose. He reached into his desk drawer and placed an iron key on the blotter between us. Heavy, rust-pitted, the metal cold even in the warm office. That opens the hut. Then he unfolded a hand-drawn map, the kind that predated GPS and satellite imaging. Old Mill Road goes about 2 miles past the last house, then it turns to dirt. After that, you walk. The path is marked, but barely, about half a mile in. He pulled out another envelope from the folder on his desk, this one sealed with wax that had cracked with age. Your grandfather left this with me 6 months before he died. Made me promise to give it to you before you saw the property. Said it was important you read it first. I took the envelope, feeling the weight of sealed paper and whatever message waited inside. Silas reached into a cabinet and pulled out a set of keys attached to a Ford key ring. Take my truck, 4-wheel drive. You'll need it. I opened my mouth to protest, but he waved a hand. Gus helped me through a rough patch once, gave me a loan when the bank wouldn't. Didn't ask for interest or guarantees. Just trusted me to pay it back when I could. He leaned forward, elbows on his desk. If you're his granddaughter, I figure I can trust you with my truck for an afternoon. The Ford was a 1998 F-150, dark green with Pennsylvania mud permanently embedded in the wheel wells. It started with a loyal rumble. The map Silas had given me lay on the passenger seat, and beside it, the sealed envelope. I turned the truck toward Old Mill Road and started driving. The pavement ended exactly where the map said it would,
Beyond that, a dirt track wound between walls of pine trees, narrow enough that branches scraped the truck's sides. Ruts and rocks made the drive slow, the truck bouncing over terrain that clearly saw more deer than vehicles. After 20 minutes, I stopped where the road simply disappeared into underbrush. According to the map, I had to continue on foot. I tucked the sealed envelope into my jacket pocket, grabbed the iron key, and stepped out into air that smelled like pine needles and old snow. The silence was profound. No traffic, no voices, no mechanical hum, just wind in the trees and my boots crunching on frozen ground. I followed a path that was less a trail and more a suggestion, marked by occasional blazes on tree trunks. Then I heard it. A bark, sharp and singular, echoing through the trees. I stopped, scanning the woods. A dog emerged from behind a massive oak, moving with the careful gait of an animal that had learned to navigate wild terrain. Border collie, black and white fur matted with burrs and dried mud, lean in a way that suggested regular hunting rather than regular meals. But his eyes were bright and intelligent, and he carried himself with purpose. He stopped 15 feet away and barked again. Not aggressive, insistent. I crouched down, making myself smaller. "Hey there." The dog tilted his head, studying me. Then he took 3 steps forward, close enough that I could see the leather collar around his neck, worn but intact. There was a metal tag. I reached out slowly, and after a moment's consideration, the dog allowed me to touch it. The tag read, Duke Thornhill. If found, return to Mill Creek property. A phone number that probably hadn't worked in months. Duke. I sat back on my heels, and the dog's tail gave a tentative wag. "You're Grandpa Gus's dog." Duke barked once, then turned and started walking down the path. After a few steps, he looked back at me, waiting. I followed. He led me through a 1/4 mile of forest, moving with the confidence of someone who'd walked this route 1,000 times. The trees began to thin, and suddenly we emerged into a clearing. The Quonset hut sat in the center, like a beached metal whale. 40 feet long, maybe 20 wide, the curved walls made from corrugated steel panels that had oxidized to a mottled rust orange. 6 of the 8 windows were shattered, the openings dark. The chimney pipe leaned at a 15-degree angle, and the metal skin was pitted with age and weather. A chain was wrapped around the double doors, held with a padlock that matched my iron key. It was exactly as worthless as I'd imagined. And yet, Duke trotted to a spot about 50 feet from the hut and sat, looking at me expectantly. I walked over and found what he wanted me to see. A concrete marker, weathered but deliberate, with words carved deep. Thornhill, 1992. The foundation holds. My fingers traced the letters, feeling where tools had bitten into concrete. The foundation holds. Grandpa Gus's last words to me, immortalized in stone. I pulled out the sealed envelope Silas had given me. The wax cracked easily under my thumb. Inside was a letter in handwriting I recognized from the back of the Polaroid. Careful, measured script. Clara, my dear girl, if you're reading this, you chose to come see rather than sell sight unseen. That tells me you have more of your grandmother in you than you probably know. She never took anyone's word about value, always had to see for herself, touch things with her own hands, make her own decisions. I loved that about her. The hut looks terrible. I know it does. But I didn't leave you a house, sweetheart. I left you an opportunity. Inside there's a wooden crate. That's your start. But the real start is underneath, below the surface. You remember how I taught you about foundations? A good house needs a foundation that can hold weight, that won't shift or crack. This land has the strongest foundation I ever found. Don't trust anyone who tells you this property is worthless. I spent 15 years keeping a secret, and I need you to understand why. With all my love, even from beyond what I could give while alive, your Grandpa Gus.
Below your feet. Underneath. Foundation. I looked at the hut with new eyes. Duke sat beside the marker, patient and knowing. The padlock screamed when I turned the key, metal scraping metal after months of disuse. The chain fell away with a dull clang that echoed across the clearing. The door groaned as I pulled it open, hinges protesting. Inside was darkness and dust. Pale light filtered through the broken windows, creating shafts that illuminated floating particles like tiny spirits. The space was bigger than it looked from outside, the curved ceiling rising 12 feet at its highest point. The concrete floor was cracked, but mostly level, scattered with leaves and debris that had blown through the shattered windows. And in the exact center of the floor sat a wooden crate, 3 feet by 2, dark with age, rope handles frayed but intact. It sat there with an intentionality that made my skin prickle. This wasn't forgotten storage. This was placement. Duke walked past me into the hut, nails clicking on concrete. He circled the crate once, then sat beside it, and looked at me with an expression that clearly said, "Well?" I crossed the floor, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The crate had no lid, just a top layer of yellowed straw that crunched under my fingers when I pushed it aside. Glass jars. Mason jars. The old-fashioned kind with rubber seals and wire bales. I lifted one out, and the straw shifted beneath, revealing more. The jar was heavy, and when I held it up to the light, I saw why. Money. Tightly rolled bundles of cash, bills held together with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. My hands shook as I pulled out another jar. Same thing. $20 bills, $50 bills, packed tight. I knelt on the cold concrete and started lifting them out systematically. 12 jars. 20. 30. By the time I reached the bottom of the crate, I'd counted 52 jars, each one filled with cash. I sat down hard, back against the crate, and pulled one bundle free. The rubber band snapped immediately, and bills spilled into my lap. I counted with fingers that wouldn't quite steady. 1,000. 2,000. 3,000 in just this one bundle. And there were dozens more in each jar. The tears came without permission, hot and fast. I covered my face with my hands and let them fall, shoulders shaking with the weight of relief and fear and gratitude all tangled together. Duke pressed against my side, warm and solid, and I wrapped one arm around him and cried into his fur. Grandpa Gus hadn't left me a few $100s. He'd left me a foundation I could actually build on. When I could breathe normally again, I wiped my face on my sleeve and reached for the bottom of the crate. Under the last layer of straw was a leather-bound notebook, the cover cracked and soft with age. Augustus Thornhill pressed into it in faded gold lettering. I opened it to the first page. Another letter, this one dated 6 months before Silas had written to me about the inheritance. Clara, if you're reading this, you found the money. Good. You'll need it for what comes next. This cash represents everything I saved after selling the house in 1993. Your grandmother and I bought that place in 1952, raised your father there, filled it with 40 years of living. After she died, I couldn't stay in those rooms anymore. Every corner held her voice, her laugh, her absence. So I sold it. Got $85,000. Added my pension savings over the years. The total came to just over $115,000. I kept it in cash because banks fail, markets crash, and I wanted to make sure that when you needed it, it would be there. Solid. Real. Something you could hold in your hands. But Clara girl, the money isn't the real gift. It's just the tool. The real gift is what's beneath your feet. I turned the page. The next entry was different. Not a letter, but instructions. They will try to buy this land. They'll say it's worthless, that the hut is junk, that you should take their money and walk away grateful. Don't believe them. The foundation is the key. Everything I built in my life, I built on good foundations. This land has the best foundation of all.
Find the trap door. I lowered the notebook slowly. Duke had moved away from me and was standing at the far corner of the hut, near where an old wood stove sat rusted and tilted. He pawed at the ground and whined. I stood, legs stiff from kneeling on cold concrete. The floor was covered in years of accumulated dirt and leaves. I grabbed a broken board from the pile of debris and started sweeping, pushing aside the layers of neglect. At first, there was nothing. Just concrete, cracked and stained. But as I worked my way toward Duke, I began to see it. A line too straight to be a crack. Then another, perpendicular to the first. They formed a square, roughly 4 feet on each side. I dropped to my knees and traced the lines with my fingers. A seam, precise and deliberate. I pressed on it, testing. Solid. I searched for a handle, a latch, anything. There was nothing visible. Duke barked once and pawed at a spot near the edge. I looked closer and saw what he'd found. The tiniest gap, barely wide enough to fit a fingernail. I grabbed the broken board again and wedged the end into the gap, then leaned my full weight down on the other end. Stone scraped against stone with a sound that made my teeth ache. The slab shifted, tilting upward. Cold air rushed out from below, smelling of deep earth and wet rock. I pushed harder, and the trapdoor lifted, revealing iron rungs descending into darkness. Duke sat at the edge, tail wagging slowly. I pulled out my phone and turned on its weak flashlight. The battery was at 23%. The light showed a ladder disappearing into a space below. Darkness beyond what the phone could illuminate. The temperature differential sent goosebumps across my skin. Outside, the sun was sliding toward the horizon. In another hour, it would be full dark, and I was miles from the truck, miles from town, alone, except for a dog who'd been living wild for months. Every practical instinct said to leave. Come back tomorrow, with better supplies, better light, someone who knew where I was. But I thought about the letter. About Grandpa Gus spending 15 years keeping a secret. About the cash that represented a sold house and a saved life. About Rosie waiting in a group home for me to build something she could call home. The foundation is the key. I looked at Duke. You coming? He barked once and started down the ladder, moving with surprising agility for a dog. His nails clicked on the iron rungs. I took a breath, gripped my phone between my teeth for light, and followed him down into the dark. The cellar was smaller than I expected, but impossibly dry. 10 feet square, walls built from carefully stacked stone that spoke of patient, deliberate work. The ceiling rose 7 feet above the packed earth floor, and the temperature held steady at a coolness that felt almost warm compared to the March air above. Duke's nails clicked as he walked the perimeter, sniffing corners with professional thoroughness. My phone's light swept across the space, catching on metal. A steel lockbox sat in the center, industrial gray with a combination dial. Beside it, more mason jars filled with what looked like water samples, each labeled in precise handwriting. And mounted to the stone wall, protected by a sheet of thick plastic, was a geological survey map larger than any I'd seen outside a classroom. I moved closer to the map. Someone had laminated it professionally, sealing it against moisture and time. The topography showed elevation lines, property boundaries, and water tables marked in various shades of blue. But what made my breath catch was the notation in red ink, bold and unmistakable. Appalachian Aquifer, Main Flow Convergence. 3 arrows converged on a single point, and someone had drawn a circle around it. The coordinates matched exactly where I was standing. The jars on the floor were dated January 1994, March 1994, July 1994. Each one crystal clear, no sediment, no discoloration. I picked up the nearest and saw attached notes with test results, pH levels, mineral content, purity ratings. Every single sample read exceptional. I turned to the lockbox. 4-digit combination lock, the kind that required knowing the exact sequence. I thought about Grandpa Gus's letter. The password, 0314. March 14th. My birthday. The dial clicked as I turned it. 0314. The lock released with a soft pop that echoed in the small space. Inside were folders.
Professional survey reports bound with metal clasps, pages thick with technical language and data tables. The top document was dated October 15, 1994, signed by John Kowalski, P.E., licensed hydrogeological engineer, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I flipped through pages of test results, core samples, flow rate calculations. The summary page made everything clear, even through the jargon. This property sits atop the convergence point of 3 underground water sources feeding the Appalachian aquifer system. Estimated flow rate, 500 gallons per minute. Estimated capacity, sufficient to supply residential and commercial needs for a community of 2,000 to 3,000 individuals for 100+ years. Water quality, exceptional. Recommended use, municipal water supply, commercial bottling, or private development. The next folder contained maps showing the aquifer's extent, its depth, its relationship to the surrounding properties. Someone had highlighted the boundaries of Grandpa Gus's 2.6 acres. The convergence point sat dead center. At the bottom of the lockbox, wrapped in a plastic sleeve, was one more letter. The paper was different this time, newer. The date was only 6 months old, written just weeks before Grandpa Gus died. Clara, I found this water in 1994, 1 year after buying the land. I hired John Kowalski to do the survey, secretly. Cost me $15,000 I couldn't really spare, but I needed to know what I had. What I found changed everything. This isn't just a spring or a well. It's the heart of the entire water system for this region. Control this point, and you control water access for miles around. I kept it secret for 15 years because I knew what would happen if the wrong people found out. They'd take it, use eminent domain, claim public necessity, or just buy up everything around me until I had no choice. I'm old now, and my heart is giving out warnings I can't ignore. By the time you read this, I'll be gone, but you'll have proof of what this land really holds. Summit Crest Development. They'll come for it. They probably already have. They've been buying land in this area for 2 years, and sooner or later they'll figure out why the water tables are so good here. Don't let them steal what I'm giving you. This isn't just money, sweetheart. This is leverage. This is your foundation to build whatever life you want. The water rights belong to the landowner in Pennsylvania. That means you. They can't take that without your permission, unless they prove genuine public need. And a private resort development isn't public need. There's money in the lockbox, $5,000 in cash. Use it for legal fees if you need to fight. Or use it to start building. Whatever you do, remember, real value isn't what someone offers you. It's what you refuse to sell. I love you, Clara girl. Build something strong. I pulled out the final envelope from the box. 5,000 in hundreds, crisp and sequential. The total resources Grandpa Gus had left me now exceeded $120,000. More money than I'd ever imagined having. Enough to change my life and Rosie's a dozen times over. But sitting in that cellar, with the geological survey spread before me, and the evidence of the aquifer surrounding me, I understood that the money was the smallest part of what I'd inherited. Duke whined softly and pawed at something in the corner. I followed his attention and found what I'd missed in my initial scan. A PVC pipe, 2 inches in diameter, emerged from the stone wall. Someone had installed a valve at its end. I reached out and slowly turned it counterclockwise. Water rushed out with a force that made me jerk back. Clear, cold, powerful. It splashed onto the dirt floor and immediately started pooling, the earth unable to absorb it fast enough. I shut the valve quickly, but not before my hand got soaked. The water was ice cold and tasted faintly mineral when a drop hit my lips. 500 gallons per minute. That's what the report said. This was just a fraction of the flow, and it came out like a fire hose. Summit Crest didn't want my land for a resort.
They wanted the water to supply whatever they were building across the entire ridge. And they'd offered me $22,000 for access to millions of gallons of pristine water. My hands shook as I climbed back up the ladder. Duke followed, and together we stood in the hut as the last light faded from the windows. The temperature was dropping fast, and I had a 2-mile hike back to Silas's truck. But I stood there anyway, looking at the space Grandpa Gus had left me. Not a home yet, not even close, but a foundation, the strongest one I'd ever had. The drive back to Millbrook happened in a blur of dark roads and racing thoughts. By the time I pulled into the small parking area behind B's diner, it was past 7, and my stomach was reminding me I hadn't eaten since the terrible bus station coffee that morning. The diner's windows glowed warm in the darkness. Through the glass, I could see maybe a dozen people scattered across booths and counter stools, the evening crowd in a town where options were limited. A bell chimed when I pushed through the door, and conversations paused just long enough for everyone to clock the stranger before resuming. The woman behind the counter looked up from pouring coffee, 57 or so, with brown-gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the kind of face that suggested she'd raised children and buried a husband and come through it all with her kindness intact, but her tolerance for nonsense permanently reduced. "Sit anywhere, honey. Menu's on the table." I chose a booth near the back where I could watch the door. Duke had stayed in the truck, curled in the passenger seat like he'd been riding shotgun his whole life. The laminated menu offered exactly what a small-town diner should: meatloaf, burgers, breakfast all day, and something called the Mountain Special that seems to involve eggs and gravy in quantities designed for loggers. The woman appeared beside my table with a coffee pot. "You look like you could use this." I nodded, and she filled the mug in front of me with practiced efficiency. The coffee was dark and honest, nothing fancy. I wrapped my hands around the mug and felt the heat seep into fingers still cold from the cellar. "You're Gus Thornhill's granddaughter." It wasn't a question. I looked up at her, startled. "How did you—" "Small town. Silas Blackwood's secretary is my cousin's daughter. She mentioned you were coming." Her expression softened. "I'm Beatrice Harlow. Most folks call me B." The name clicked into place. The diner. B's place. She owned this. "Did you know my grandfather?" Something shifted in her face. Grief, old but still present. "Knew him well. He helped me through a rough patch back in 2008. I was about to lose this place after my husband died. Banks wouldn't give me a loan. Creditors were circling. Gus heard about it somehow and showed up one day with a check for $15,000. Wouldn't let me refuse it." I stared at her. That was a lot of money. It was everything. She pulled a chair from the neighboring table and sat down without asking, the gesture of someone who owned the place and understood that some conversations needed sitting. He told me to pay it back when I could. No interest, no pressure. Took me 5 years, but I paid every penny. Never asked for a receipt or a contract, just trusted me. The coffee burned going down, but I needed something to do with my hands. Did he do that often? Help people? More than most knew. He was quiet about it, but in a town this size, word gets around. She studied me with the frank assessment of someone who'd spent decades reading customers. "You planning to sell that land?" "I don't know yet." I met her eyes. "What do you know about Summit Crest?" Her expression hardened. "Vultures. They've been buying up properties for 2 years, always offering just enough that people who are struggling can't afford to say no. 3 families lost their homes in the last 6 months. They didn't sell willingly. Summit found violations, pushed inspections, made life impossible until selling seemed like the only option." "What are they building?" "Resort, they say. Luxury cabins, private amenities, all that. But they've bought way more land than any resort needs." She leaned forward slightly. "And they're aggressive about it. If you're thinking of keeping that property, you should know what you're up against." I thought about the aquifer, the survey maps, the careful secrecy Grandpa Gus had maintained for 15 years. "How much do you know about water rights around here?" B's eyebrows rose. "Specific question.
Why? Because I think that's what they really want. Before she could respond, the bell chimed and two men in business casual walked in. They scanned the diner with the particular awareness of people unused to being anywhere that didn't have valet parking. Their eyes landed on me, and something in their posture shifted. Bea followed my gaze, and her jaw tightened. That's Marcus Brennan. He's one of theirs. The men approached my table. The first one smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Clara Thornhill. I'm Marcus Brennan, Vice President of Acquisitions for Summit Crest Development. This is Valerie Cross, our legal counsel. The woman with him was sharp-featured and carried an iPad like a weapon. I didn't invite you to sit down. Brennan's smile never wavered. We won't take much of your time. We heard you were in town looking at the Thornhill property. We wanted to introduce ourselves and make sure you received our offer. I got the letter. Excellent. Then you know we're prepared to offer $22,000. That's well above market value for undeveloped land in this area. Bea stood abruptly, her chair scraping against linoleum. You want something to eat, Clara? Or are you just here for coffee? I'm hungry. Whatever the special is. She nodded and walked back to the counter, but I could see her watching from the corner of her eye. Brennan didn't acknowledge her departure. Miss Thornhill, I understand this is sudden, but I want you to know we're serious buyers. If $22,000 seems low, we can discuss adjustments. We're flexible. I took another sip of coffee, using the time to steady my voice. Why do you want it? For a moment, his professional veneer slipped. Then he recovered. It's strategically positioned for our development plans. The topography, the access points. It's about the water. Valerie's fingers stopped mid-swipe on her iPad screen. Brennan's expression went carefully neutral. I'm not sure what you mean. I mean the aquifer, the convergence point, the 500 gallons per minute flowing under that property. The silence stretched long enough that two people at the counter turned to look. Valerie was the first to speak, her voice sharp and controlled. Miss Thornhill, I don't know where you're getting your information, but from the geological survey my grandfather commissioned in 1994. Professional engineer, licensed by the state, complete with core samples and flow rate analysis. Brennan's jaw worked. Then we need to be honest with each other. Yes, we're aware of the water resources in that area. It's part of what makes the region attractive for development. We're planning a comprehensive infrastructure project that would benefit the entire community. By charging them 3 times what they pay now? That's not our intention. We're looking to partner with local government to provide improved services. Then why not partner with me? I'm local. I own the water rights. Valerie leaned forward. Water rights in Pennsylvania are complex. There are provisions for reasonable use, municipal access, public necessity, and none of those apply to a private resort. I kept my voice level, but my heart was hammering. You can't claim public necessity for a for-profit development. Brennan's pleasant mask finally cracked. Miss Thornhill, you're 18 years old. You have no experience with property law, development, or resource management. We're offering you a very generous amount for what is essentially a worthless piece of land with a rusted shed on it. $85,000. The number hung in the air between us. Valerie's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? Your new offer. $85,000 or this conversation is over. Brennan's fingers drummed on the table. That's significantly higher than you hoped to pay. I know. But we both know what that land is worth. So either make a real offer or stop wasting my time. They exchanged a glance. Then Brennan stood. We'll need to discuss this with our partners. But, Miss Thornhill, one more thing. He pulled a business card from his pocket and set it on the table. This development is happening. We've already acquired 90% of the land we need. Your property is the last piece. If we have to, we can pursue other legal options. Eminent domain, for instance, if we can demonstrate public benefit. You just said it was for a private resort. Plans evolve. A municipal water system could easily qualify as public infrastructure. He smiled again, and this time there was nothing pleasant in it. Think carefully about what you want to do. We're offering you a chance to walk away with more money than you've probably seen in your life. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." They left, the bell chiming cheerfully behind them. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set my coffee down. Bea reappeared with a plate, piled with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. She set it in front of me and slid into the seat Brennan had vacated. "Well, sounds like you rattled them." "They're threatening eminent domain." "Of course they are. It's what they do when buying nice doesn't work." She pushed the plate toward me. "Eat. You look about ready to pass out." I picked up the fork and found I was ravenous. The food was simple and good, the kind that reminded you that sustenance could also be comfort. Bea waited until I'd eaten half the plate before speaking again. "You really have proof about the water? Geological survey, water samples, flow rate calculations, everything professionally documented. Then you've got leverage. But you're also going to need help." She pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wrote a phone number. "That's Silas Blackwood's cell."
If you haven't talked to him about this yet, you should. He's one of the only lawyers in town who won't roll over for Summit Crest. I've met him. He gave me his truck to get up to the property. Smart man. Probably figured you'd need someone on your side. She stood and refilled my coffee. "Whatever you decide, Clara, know that there are people here who remember what Gus did for this town. He was a good man, and he wouldn't have left you that land if he didn't think you could handle what came with it." After she walked away, I pulled out my phone. The battery was down to 8%, but I had to make this call. Rosie answered on the third ring. "Clara?" Her voice was thick with sleep. "What time is it?" "Late. I'm sorry. I just needed to hear your voice. What happened? Is the land real?" I looked around the diner, at the warm lights and the people finishing their evening meals, at the window where darkness pressed against glass. "It's real. It's more than I thought. There's money and there's something else. Something big." A pause. "How big?" "Big enough that people want to take it from me." "Then don't let them." The certainty in her voice made my throat tight. "You promised me a home. If this is it, fight for it." "What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough?" "You walked out of Cedar Valley with nothing, and you're still standing. That's stronger than most people ever get." Another pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Did you know Grandpa Gus used to send me letters?" "What?" "After they separated us. Every month, a letter would come. The counselors would read them first to make sure they were appropriate, but they always let me have them. He told me stories about you when you were little. About how you'd stand on a step stool in his workshop, determined to use tools that were too big for your hands. How you'd work on a project for hours without giving up, even when you got frustrated. I didn't know he wrote to you. He said you were the most stubborn person he'd ever met, that you'd inherited it from Grandma Elizabeth and there was no fixing it. But that stubbornness would serve you well someday, when you found something worth holding on to." My vision blurred. The diner's warm lights fractured into stars. "I'm scared, Rosie." "I know, but you're not alone. Remember that." After I hung up, I sat in the booth and stared at Brennan's business card. Summit Crest Development. Corporate address in Philadelphia. Embossed logo that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. I picked up my fork and finished eating. Then I left cash on the table with a generous tip, waved to Bea, and walked out into the night, where Duke was waiting in Silas's truck. The motel was exactly what I expected. $40 a night paid in cash, a room that smelled faintly of old smoke and industrial cleaner. But the sheets were clean and the heat worked, and when I locked the door behind me, I felt safer than I had since leaving Cedar Valley that morning. Duke curled up at the foot of the bed without being invited. I sat cross-legged on the thin mattress and pulled out my phone one more time before the battery died. Searched for Water Rights Pennsylvania, Land Ownership, Aquifer, Eminent Domain, Private Development. The results were dense with legal language, but the core message was clear.
Property owners controlled water beneath their land, but that control had limits. Municipal needs could override private ownership. Public benefit could justify seizure. The question was whether Summit Crest could actually prove public benefit, or if their threats were bluffing. My phone died at 2%. I plugged it in and lay back on the bed, staring at ceiling tiles marked with water stains from some long-ago leak. Duke's breathing was slow and steady, the rhythm of an animal who'd survived alone and learned to sleep light. I thought about Grandpa Gus spending 15 years keeping a secret, about the careful documentation, the hidden cellar, the money saved in jars. He'd been preparing for this moment, preparing for me to make a choice. 22,000 would change my life. 85,000 would change it more. I could take Rosie and disappear to somewhere cheap, somewhere we could start fresh without the weight of group homes and state care. We could be normal. We could be safe. But I'd also be giving up the leverage Grandpa Gus had spent decades creating. I'd be letting Summit Crest take the aquifer and turn it into profit, while the people of Millbrook paid whatever rates the corporation decided were fair. Sleep came eventually, but it was thin and fractured. I dreamed of water flowing underground, of foundations cracking, of Rosie standing behind glass I couldn't break through. When morning light filtered through the motel curtains, I knew what I had to do next. Silas Blackwood's office door was unlocked when I arrived at 8:30. The receptionist from yesterday looked up from her crossword and smiled. "He's expecting you. Go on in." Silas was already at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, a mug of coffee steaming beside a stack of folders. He looked up when I entered. "I heard you had visitors at B's last night. News travels fast." "It's Millbrook. News travels before it even happens." He gestured to the chair. "What did they offer you?" 22,000 initially, then 85 when I pushed back, and they threatened eminent domain. His expression darkened. Of course they did. It's their standard playbook. But let me be clear. Eminent domain for a private development is extremely difficult to prove in Pennsylvania, especially post-Kelo decision. They'd need to demonstrate substantial public benefit, and luxury resort cabins don't qualify. What about water infrastructure? He was quiet for a moment. That's more complicated. If they claim they're building a municipal water system, they might have a case. But it would require proving genuine public need and municipal partnership. He leaned back in his chair. "Did you find what Gus left you?" I pulled the geological survey from my bag and laid it on his desk. "Everything." Silas opened the folder and read in silence for several minutes. When he looked up, his expression had shifted to something I couldn't quite read. Professional respect, maybe. Or concern. "This changes everything. With this documentation, you're not just a landowner. You're controlling a resource worth millions." Summit Crest knows, or they suspect. That explains the aggressive approach. He closed the folder carefully. "Clara, I need to be honest with you about what you're facing. Summit Crest is a corporation with significant resources. If you refuse to sell, they will make this difficult. They'll find code violations, push inspections, file legal challenges. They'll try to exhaust you financially and emotionally until selling seems like the only option. So what do I do?" He pulled out a legal pad and uncapped a pen. "First, we don't sell. We explore leasing rights. You maintain ownership, they pay for access. Second, we set up a limited liability company in your name, Thornhill Water Holdings. It protects your personal assets if this turns into litigation. Third, we get an independent assessment from a current expert. Gus's survey is solid, but it's 30 years old. We need fresh data. All of that costs money." He waved a hand. "The LLC is $1,500. I can file it myself. The assessment, that's where it gets expensive. You'll need a licensed hydrogeologist, and good ones don't work cheap. 8 to 12,000 probably." "I can pay that. Grandpa Gus left money." "How much?" 115,000 in cash, plus another 5 in the lockbox. Silas's eyebrows rose.
Well, that's a foundation to work with. He made notes on his pad. I know someone. Dr. Patricia Hayes teaches at Penn State, does consulting work. She's expensive, but she's the best in the region, and her reports hold up in court. How long would this take? Setup, assessment, documentation, 6 to 8 weeks minimum. During that time, Summit Crest will pressure you. They'll make new offers. They'll hint at consequences. He met my eyes. Can you handle that kind of pressure? I thought about the years in group homes, the monthly meetings with social workers who decided whether I'd earned enough points for a phone call to Rosie, the constant evaluation, the perpetual judgment. If I can survive state care, I can survive corporate intimidation. Good. He made another note. One more thing. We should respond to their eminent domain threat formally. I'll draft a letter asserting your rights and making clear you have legal counsel. It won't stop them if they're serious, but it might make them think twice. What if they're not bluffing? What if they actually file? Then we fight it in court. It won't be quick or easy, but Pennsylvania law is on our side if we can prove they're not acting for genuine public benefit. I left his office an hour later with a folder full of documents I didn't fully understand and a timeline that felt simultaneously too long and too short. 6 to 8 weeks to build a case. 6 to 8 weeks of living in a motel or sleeping in a rusted hut while Summit Crest tried to push me off land that was legally mine. The Greyhound to Harrisburg left at 1. I bought a ticket with cash and settled into a seat near the back, Duke's borrowed carrier tucked under my legs. Silas had given me Dr. Hayes' contact information, along with the referral letter, and she'd agreed to meet that afternoon between classes. Harrisburg was everything Millbrook wasn't. Urban sprawl, traffic that moved in angry surges, buildings that blocked sky. The university campus felt like a different country, all manicured lawns and students who'd never wondered where their next meal was coming from. Dr. Patricia Hayes' office was in the Earth Sciences building, 3rd floor, overlooking a quad where students sprawled on grass despite the March chill. She answered my knock with a distracted, "Come in," and looked up from a desk buried in papers and rock samples. "You must be Clara." She was maybe 45, with steel gray hair pulled into a messy bun, and the kind of face that suggested she spent more time in the field than in front of mirrors. "Sit down. Tell me what you've got." I handed her Kowalski's survey. She opened it, and her expression shifted immediately from polite interest to focused attention. She read in silence for 10 minutes, occasionally making small sounds of interest or approval. "This is excellent work. John Kowalski, I know his name. Old school, but thorough. Where did you get this?" "My grandfather commissioned it in 1994. The property just transferred to me, and Summit Crest found out." She set the folder down. "Let me guess. They made you a low-ball offer, and when you didn't immediately accept, they escalated." "How did you know?" "Because I've consulted on 3 other cases involving Summit Crest in the last 5 years. They have a pattern. Identify valuable resources, acquire land through aggressive tactics, develop with minimal local benefit." She pulled out a fresh notebook. "What do you want from me?" "A current assessment, something that confirms or updates these findings, something that will hold up in court if it comes to that. It'll cost $10,000 plus expenses. Take me 4 to 6 weeks to do it properly. Core samples, flow testing, water quality analysis, geological mapping." The money made my stomach clench, but I nodded. "When can you start?" She checked a calendar on her wall. "I have a break between semesters starting next week. I can do the initial site visit then." We spent the next hour going through technical details I barely understood. Aquifer mechanics, flow rates, mineral composition. Dr. Hayes explained it with the patience of someone who'd taught undergraduates to care about hydrology, and slowly pieces began to click into place. "What you have is rare. Most aquifers are diffuse, water spread across large areas at varying depths. This is a convergence point where 3 separate flows meet. That concentration creates both volume and pressure. It's valuable not just for quantity, but for accessibility.
Could it really supply a whole community? 2,000 to 3,000 people easily based on these flow rates, more if managed properly. She closed the notebook. Miss Thornhill, I need to be clear about something. If Summit Crest is serious about developing this region, they need your water. Everything else they've bought is worthless without it. That gives you leverage, but it also makes you a target. I'm already a target. They threatened eminent domain yesterday. Then you need to be smart. Don't give them ammunition. Get proper permits for any work you do on the property. Document everything. Keep detailed records of all communications. She stood and walked to her window.
I've seen companies like Summit Crest crush people who don't know how to fight back. But I've also seen individuals with good lawyers and solid evidence hold their ground. The bus back to Millbrook left at 6. I sat in the rear again, watching the city lights give way to darkness and sparse towns. My phone had 4 missed calls, all from the same number. I didn't recognize it. When I called back, a woman answered. Valerie Cross, Summit Crest Legal Counsel.
Miss Thornhill.
I'm glad you returned my call. I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday.
I'm listening. We've discussed your counteroffer with our team. We're prepared to go to $250,000 for the property. That's our final offer. The number was staggering, life-changing, enough to set Rosie and me up for years, to pay for college, to build stability we'd never had. No. A pause. Miss Thornhill, I don't think you understand the position you're in. I understand perfectly.
You need my water to make your development work. Without it, everything you've bought is just expensive dirt.
Her tone went sharp. We have options you may not have considered. Property tax assessments can be quite burdensome when land values suddenly increase. Code enforcement can be very thorough when examining substandard structures, and as we mentioned, eminent domain remains a possibility if we determine public benefit. Do what you need to do. I'm not selling. You're making a mistake.
Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with adrenaline. Duke pressed against my leg, warm and solid. Through the window, Pennsylvania rolled past in shades of black and deeper black. 6 weeks until Dr. Hayes' assessment. 6 weeks of living in legal limbo while Summit Crest tried to intimidate or outmaneuver me. 6 weeks to turn a rusted hut into something Rosie could actually call home. When the bus dropped me back in Millbrook, it was past 9 and the town was mostly dark. Only B's diner still glowed, a handful of late diners visible through the windows. I walked in because I had nowhere else to go, and B looked up from wiping down tables. Coffee or something stronger? Just coffee, and maybe some advice. She poured a mug and slid onto the stool beside me at the counter. What kind of advice? The kind about how to repair a Quonset hut with no construction experience and limited money. Her expression shifted to something between amusement and concern. You're planning to live there? I'm planning to make it livable. There's a difference. She was quiet for a moment, then, You know Finn Gallagher? The name meant nothing. Should I? Carpenter. Does good work, reasonable rates. Former military, came back from overseas about 3 years ago. Been doing odd jobs around town ever since. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through contacts. He's also got no love for Summit Crest. They bought his family's property last year for half what it was worth when his dad was too sick to fight. She called, and someone answered on the 3rd ring. Their conversation was brief and practical. When she hung up, she was smiling slightly. He'll meet you at the property tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock. Bring coffee and a list of what needs fixing. That night I slept at the motel again, but this time I dreamed of walls going up and windows being sealed. Dreamed of a space transforming from ruin to shelter. When morning came, I was already awake, watching grey light creep across the ceiling and planning what came next. Finn Gallagher arrived at 8:15 in a pickup truck that had seen better decades. He was 27, but carried himself older, with the particular wariness of someone who'd seen combat and come back with invisible wounds. Red hair cropped military short, Lean frame, work boots that had trampled through mud on 3 continents. He stepped out of the truck and surveyed the Quonset hut with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to assess structural integrity under fire. "This is what you're working with." His voice was flat, matter-of-fact. No judgment, just observation. I nodded and handed him the coffee Bea had insisted I bring. He took it without acknowledgement and walked a slow circle around the structure, occasionally stopping to press his palm against the metal or peer through broken windows. Shell's solid. Rust is surface level mostly. Biggest issues are the windows, the chimney mounting, and whatever's happening with that door frame. Can it be fixed? Everything can be fixed. Question is, how much you want to spend and how fast you need it done. I have 18,000 I can use right now, and I need it livable in 6 weeks. He turned to look at me fully for the first time. Why 6 weeks? Because that's when I'll know if I get to keep it, or if a corporation takes it away from me. Something shifted in his expression. Summit Crest. You know them. They bought my father's land last year. Dad had cancer, couldn't fight them, couldn't afford lawyers. They offered $40,000 for property worth 3 times that. He was too sick to care anymore, and they knew it. Finn's jaw tightened. 3 months after he signed, he died. Never even saw the money. It all went to medical bills. I'm sorry. Don't be. Just don't let them do to you what they did to him. He drained the coffee in 3 long swallows. Show me the inside. We spent 2 hours going through every inch of the hut. Finn took measurements, made notes in a battered notebook, occasionally grunting observations that ranged from encouraging to concerning. Duke shadowed us, sniffing corners and settling into patches of sunlight that found their way through the broken windows. Here's what you need, minimum. 6 windows replaced. Not fancy, just functional. Seal the roof seams with industrial adhesive and metal patches. Straighten and secure the chimney. Install the wood stove properly with fire-safe mounting. Build interior walls to create actual rooms instead of one open space. Basic electrical from a generator until you can get grid power. Water from your spring with a simple filtration system. How much? Materials. Maybe 8,000 if we're careful. My time, I usually charge $150 a day. I can't afford that and the materials. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, pay me $100. I'll work 6 days a week. Should take us about a month, if you help. Why would you do that? Because Summit Crest shouldn't get to win just because they have more money. And because Bea called me at midnight last night and told me Gus Thornhill's granddaughter was trying to hold on to something that mattered. Gus helped my dad when I was overseas, sent him money for prescriptions the VA wouldn't cover. Never asked for it back. The weight of Grandpa Gus's generosity kept surprising me, kept revealing itself in unexpected places. I'm not a carpenter. You don't need to be. You just need to be willing to learn and work hard. His expression was almost a smile. Military taught me you can train anybody who's not afraid of getting their hands dirty. When can we start? Now. The work consumed everything. Finn moved with focused intensity, treating construction like mission execution. We started by clearing debris until the hut was nothing but curved walls and concrete floor. My hands blistered on day 2. By day 4, the blisters had burst and reformed as calluses that made gripping tools easier. Finn didn't talk much, but he taught constantly. How to measure twice and cut once. How to recognize structural rust versus cosmetic damage. How to use a level, a square, a drill without destroying the bit. Every lesson was practical, delivered between hammer strikes and saw cuts. Duke appointed himself supervisor, moving between sunny spots, occasionally investigating smells or barking at deer. His presence made the work feel less like labor and more like home building. On day 6, Bea arrived with lunch, sandwiches thick with roast beef, thermoses of soup steaming in cool air. She sat on an upturned crate watching us eat. Looks different already. Foundation was good. Everything else is just work. Finn wiped his mouth. Give us 3 more weeks. It'll be habitable. Any trouble from Summit Crest? Not yet. I took another bite. But they called again yesterday. Offered $250,000. B's eyebrows rose. That's serious money, Clara. I know, but it's not about money. It's about not letting them take what isn't theirs. She nodded slowly. Your grandfather would understand that. He turned down more than one offer when the price came at the wrong cost. After she left, Finn and I returned to work. We were framing the first interior wall when a white SUV pulled up as far as the undergrowth allowed. 2 men got out, one carrying a clipboard. Finn's hand stilled. County inspector. My stomach dropped. Already? The men approached with bureaucratic authority. The one with the clipboard was maybe 50, with a gut suggesting too many desk lunches, and eyes suggesting he'd rather be elsewhere. His companion was younger, probably a trainee. This the Thornhill property? It is. My voice came steadier than I felt. Can I help you? County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction. The inspector consulted his clipboard. You're doing structural work without permits. I'm repairing an existing building, installing interior walls, new windows, modifying ventilation. That requires building permits. He finally looked up. I'm going to need to see your documentation. I don't have permits yet. I only started a week ago. Then you need to stop immediately. He pulled out a pad and started writing. Continuing without permits carries fines and potential criminal charges. Finn stepped forward. The structure was built in 1992. Pre-existing buildings have different regulations for repair versus new construction. The inspector's expression hardened. You a lawyer? Combat engineer, 4th Infantry Division. I know building codes. Well, engineer, the regulations are clear. Major modifications require permits. He tore off a yellow copy and handed it to me. You have 48 hours to apply or cease all work. Failure to comply will result in additional citations. They left before I could respond. I stood holding the citation, reading words designed to be deliberately opaque. Required permits: structural, electrical, plumbing. Processing time: 14 to 21 days. Application fees: $1,500. Finn took the paper from my shaking hands. This is Summit Crest. How do you know? Because county doesn't randomly send inspectors to properties in the middle of nowhere. Someone filed a complaint. Someone who knows you're working here. I walked to the clearing's edge, needing space to breathe. 14 to 21 days of waiting. $1,500 before I could spend another dollar on materials. They were bleeding me slowly, making this so expensive and exhausting that selling would feel like relief. Duke appeared at my side, pressing his shoulder against my leg. I ran my fingers through his fur and tried to think past panic. We'll apply for the permits. I turned back to Finn. Can we do anything while we wait? On paper? No. His expression was neutral. Off paper, there are things that don't require permits that happen to make a building more livable. Cleaning, organizing, maybe some weatherproofing that could be interpreted as maintenance. The hint was clear. We couldn't frame walls or install windows, but we could prepare everything so actual installation would take days instead of weeks once permits cleared. I drove into town that afternoon and found Silas reviewing contracts. When I showed him the citation, he read it with increasing irritation. They're within legal bounds, but just barely. Code enforcement has discretion on what triggers permit requirements. Someone pushed them to interpret your work as broadly as possible. Can I fight it? You can, but it'll take longer than just getting the permits. And honestly, having everything properly permitted protects you if this goes to court. He pulled out a form. I'll help you fill out applications. We can file today, pay fees, and hope they process faster than maximum time. Hope isn't a strategy, number. But it's what we've got right now. The permit applications were Byzantine in complexity. Questions about structural load, electrical capacity, water source, septic systems.
Silas walked me through each section with patient precision, translating bureaucratic language into practical meaning.
By the time we finished, the sun was setting and my head ached. Processing takes 2 to 3 weeks typically, but given Summit Crest's involvement, I'd planned for the full 3. That puts me at 5 weeks before Dr. Hayes finishes her assessment, which means you'll have about a week to complete work before you present your case. He leaned back. Clara, you need to prepare for the possibility that Summit Crest won't wait for legal proceedings. They might file for eminent domain during this window. Then what do I do? Fight it. Make noise. Make sure the community knows what's happening. Eminent domain requires demonstrating public benefit. Hard to do when the public is against you. How do I make them care? Tell them the truth. He pulled out a folder. I've been researching. Summit Crest's development in other regions consistently results in higher costs for local residents. Water prices tripled in one Montana town after they took over municipal supply. Property taxes increased across the board when they developed land in West Virginia. You have proof? Public records, news articles, court filings, everything documented. He slid the folder across. If people here understand Summit Crest isn't bringing jobs and prosperity, but extraction and inflation, they might think twice about supporting eminent domain. That night at the motel, I spread Silas's research across the bed. Article after article detailing Summit Crest aftermath. Communities promised revitalization, but got minimum wage service jobs and doubled housing costs. Local businesses squeezed out by corporate amenities. Water systems sold to highest bidders, while residents faced rate hikes. I called Rosie at 9 during quiet hours. Hey. Her voice was soft. You okay? You sound tired. Long day. Got hit with a code violation. Have to wait 3 weeks for permits. Can you wait that long? Don't have a choice. I rubbed my eyes. The motel's fluorescent light, harsh and temporary. Rosie, what if I'm wrong? What if I should take their money and find us somewhere easier? Easier isn't always better. You're 12. You shouldn't have to be this wise. Maybe not, but I've had 6 years watching adults make decisions about my life. Most chose easy. None chose me. Her breathing was audible. You're choosing me? That matters more than easy. After we hung up, I lay in darkness thinking about choice versus circumstance. About how much of my life had been determined by others' decisions, and how much power I actually had to determine what came next. The 3 weeks of permit processing stretched like taffy. Finn and I worked around restrictions, doing everything classified as preparation rather than construction. We sorted materials, staged tools, cleaned every surface until the hut's interior gleamed with promise. Duke seems to understand the forced slowness, spending long afternoons dozing in patches of spring sunlight that grew warmer as March bled into April. Dr. Hayes came twice, bringing equipment that looked like it belonged to a geological expedition. She drilled core samples, ran water tests, set up monitoring equipment measuring flow rates and pressure. Each visit she grew more animated, the excitement scientists get when data confirms hypotheses. This is exceptional. She showed me readings on a tablet I barely understood. Flow rate is actually higher than Kowalski measured in '94. The aquifer's feeding from a larger system than he could access with technology available then. What does that mean for my case? It means you're not sitting on a useful water source. You're sitting on the water source for this entire region. Everything within 10 miles draws from the same system, but your property is the main artery. Control this, control everything. The permits cleared on day 19, arriving at Silas's office with stamps and signatures making them official. I drove to the property that afternoon with Finn, and we resumed work with intensity that felt almost violent. 4 days to install 6 windows, build 2 interior walls, mount the wood stove, and seal the roof before Dr. Hayes would present her final assessment. Finn worked 16-hour days without complaint. I matched him hour for hour, learning to function through exhaustion that made my hands shake and vision blur. B brought food twice daily, leaving thermoses and containers without comment, understanding we were past social niceties.
On the fourth night, with the last window sealed and walls standing sturdy, Finn and I stood in what was now recognizably a home. 2 small bedrooms, one slightly larger, a main living space with the wood stove properly mounted and vented. Rough but functional. Shelter against weather and cold. It's not finished. Finn's voice was hoarse from 4 days of sustained labor. But it's livable. I walked to what would be Rosie's window and looked out at forest going dark. Thank you for all of this. Thank you for giving me a reason to tell Summit Crest to go to hell. Doctor. Hayes arrived the next morning with her final report in a leather portfolio suggesting professional gravitas. We sat at Silas's office, me, Finn, Silas, Dr. Hayes, while she opened the folder and laid out findings. The aquifer system beneath the Thornhill property is the primary recharge point for the entire Millbrook Ridge watershed. Flow rate, 520 gallons per minute, consistent across all measurement periods. Water quality, exceptional, meeting or exceeding all federal and state standards for potable water. Estimated capacity, sufficient to supply 3,000 residential units, or equivalent commercial use, for a minimum of 100 years at current consumption rates. She pulled out maps marked with colored zones. Every property Summit Crest has acquired is effectively worthless for their stated resort development without access to this water. The next nearest source is 14 miles away and produces less than half the volume. She looked at me directly. Miss Thornhill, the market value of perpetual water rights to this aquifer, if leased commercially, would range from $80,000 to $150,000 annually. Annually. The word hung in air. Silas leaned forward. That's substantially higher than their purchase offer. Because they know what this is worth. They've known from the beginning. Doctor. Hayes closed the portfolio. They've been buying land cheap, planning to control the water source, then charging whatever rates the market will bear. Classic resource capture. Can we use this in court? It's exactly what you need. This report will establish the property's true value and demonstrate that Summit Crest's eminent domain claim is based on private profit, not public benefit. The certified letter arrived 2 days later. I recognized the Summit Crest logo before opening it. Legal-sized envelope, thick with documents, delivered with signature required. Notice of intent to initiate eminent domain proceedings. Summit Crest Development Corporation hereby provides notice of intent to petition the Court of Common Pleas of Pennsylvania to exercise eminent domain over property located at Mill Creek Ridge, Millbrook, Pennsylvania, owned by Clara Elizabeth Thornhill. Said property is required for development of regional water infrastructure necessary for public benefit. Summit Crest has partnered with Millbrook County to develop comprehensive municipal water system serving 8 townships and estimated population of 12,000 residents. Attached, please find engineering assessments, county partnership agreements, and projected public benefit analyses. Property owner has 15 days to respond before formal proceedings are filed. I read it 3 times, each pass making my hands shake harder. They weren't bluffing. They'd manufactured a public benefit claim by partnering with the county, promising infrastructure justifying seizure. Silas read it with his lawyer face on, revealing nothing. This is more aggressive than I anticipated. They've been planning this for months. These partnership agreements take time to negotiate. Can they actually do this? They can try. Whether they succeed depends on proving genuine public necessity and fair compensation. He pointed to a section buried in middle pages. They're offering $300,000 as just compensation. That's substantially below market value for perpetual water rights. So we fight it. We fight it. But Clara, you need to understand what that means. This will be public. It'll go through hearings where Summit Crest presents their case to the community. They'll argue jobs, infrastructure, progress. You'll need to argue why your private ownership serves the public better than their development. I thought about the research you'd shown me. Montana, West Virginia, the pattern of promises and exploitation. Then I thought about something else. What if it's not private ownership? What if I offer the community the same thing Summit Crest is promising, but better?
What do you mean?
I mean, I lease them water rights, but with conditions: lower rates for residents, guaranteed access for local businesses, percentage of revenue into community fund for schools or infrastructure.
I offer them benefits Summit Crest claims they'll provide, except I actually deliver. That's actually brilliant. Silas started making notes. If you can demonstrate you're willing to serve public benefit voluntarily, it undermines their eminent domain argument completely. How do I get people to believe me? You tell them, publicly, before Summit Crest can control the narrative. 3 days after the eminent domain notice arrived, Silas called an emergency meeting. The community center was available Thursday evening, and by Wednesday, everyone in Millbrook knew Gus Thornhill's granddaughter had something to say about Summit Crest. I spent Wednesday night preparing with Finn and Silas, creating poster-sized versions of key data. Dr. Hayes's flow rate charts, maps showing the aquifer's extent, graphs comparing Summit Crest's historical price impacts in other communities. Thursday evening, the community center was packed. 60 people, maybe 70. Marcus Brennan sat front row with Valerie Cross and Warren Aldridge. Summit Crest's leadership ready to defend their position. At 7, Silas introduced me. I walked to the podium on uncertain legs. My name is Clara Thornhill. Most of you knew my grandfather. He left me property on Mill Creek Ridge. Summit Crest has offered money, but they've also threatened eminent domain. I gestured to the posters. The property sits on the main convergence point for the aquifer feeding water to this region. 520 gallons per minute. Enough to supply 3,000 homes indefinitely. Summit Crest has known about this from the beginning. They're not buying land for a resort. They're buying land to control water. I pointed to the second set of posters. These are public records from other communities. In Montana, water rates tripled within 2 years. In West Virginia, property taxes increased 40%. In Colorado, local businesses were priced out. Valerie stood. Those are isolated incidents taken out of context. They're a pattern. The room erupted in competing voices. Eventually, someone asked the question I'd been waiting for. Robert Mitchell stood. What exactly are you proposing, Miss Thornhill? I'm offering Millbrook a different option. I'll lease water rights to the county at cost plus 10%. Revenue goes into a community fund you control. Residents get priority access at rates 25% below market. 30 years, legally binding. The silence was profound. A woman spoke up. Why would you do that instead of taking their money? Because my grandfather didn't leave me this land to make me rich. He left it so I could choose to do something that mattered. I paused. And because I have a 12-year-old sister in foster care, I want her to grow up in a community that values people over profit. Brennan stood. This is touching. But Miss Thornhill is 18 with no experience. Summit Crest offers comprehensive solution with established expertise. The choice should be obvious. B stood from her seat. Gus Thornhill lived here 20 years. He helped more people than most knew about. If his granddaughter is anything like him, I trust her word more than a corporation's contract. Finn stood next. I worked construction for Summit Crest in Montana. Saw exactly what they're promising here. Clara's been working her hands bloody for 6 weeks. She's not playing games. One by one, others stood. Eventually, someone called for a vote. 38 for my proposal, 26 for Summit Crest. Majority support, enough that Brennan's expression tightened. The formal hearing was scheduled 3 weeks later at the county courthouse. Summit Crest filed their petition the morning after the town meeting. Silas filed our response within 24 hours. Judge Margaret O'Brien presided, 62 with steel-gray hair and an expression suggesting she'd heard every legal argument and believed none of them. Summit Crest's lead attorney presented first. Your Honor, this is straightforward public necessity. Summit Crest has partnered with Millbrook County to develop municipal water system serving 12,000 residents. Without access to this aquifer, The $45 million project cannot proceed. Miss Thornhill is 18, with no experience. We offer just compensation of $300,000. Silas stood. Your Honor, Summit Crest's case rests on false premises. Dr. Patricia Hayes's independent assessment confirms the aquifer's commercial value at $80,000 to $150,000 annually. Over 30 years, that's $2.4 to $4.5 million. Their $300,000 is grossly inadequate. Moreover, Summit Crest's history shows a pattern. In Montana, water rates tripled. In West Virginia, property taxes increased 40%. These aren't isolated incidents. They're business strategy. Miss Thornhill has proposed a legally binding lease, offering water to the county at cost plus 10%, with residents receiving priority access at rates 25% below market. This is concrete alternative, serving genuine public benefit without enriching a corporation. Judge O'Brien reviewed documents for several minutes. Then she looked at me. Miss Thornhill, you understand if I deny this petition, Summit Crest will pursue other legal avenues. I stood. Yes, Your Honor. And you're committed to this lease proposal? This land is my foundation, for me and my sister. I don't want to sell it. I want to use it to build something that lasts. She studied me for a long moment. I'm taking this under advisement. I'll issue a ruling within 30 days. The 30 days felt endless. I finished the hut, painting walls, installing shelves, building furniture. B brought curtains. Finn helped build a proper porch. 3 weeks in, Silas called. The judge is issuing her ruling Friday at 10 a.m. Friday morning, the courthouse was less crowded. Judge O'Brien entered exactly at 10. I've reviewed all submissions and considered arguments from both parties. This is my ruling. Eminent domain is serious power for genuine public necessity when no reasonable alternative exists. Summit Crest has failed to meet that burden on both counts. First, regarding public necessity, evidence suggests primary motivation is private profit. Their history shows inflated costs and broken promises. Moreover, the defendant has presented viable alternatives serving the same public need. Second, regarding just compensation, expert testimony establishes water rights have estimated annual value of $80,000 to $150,000. Summit Crest's offer of $300,000 is grossly inadequate. Most importantly, Miss Thornhill has demonstrated willingness and capacity to serve public benefit voluntarily. Therefore, Summit Crest's petition for eminent domain is denied. The gavel fell. Outside the courthouse, a reporter called out, "What are you going to do now?" I'm going home. Then I'm going to work with the county to finalize the lease agreement. And then I'm going to bring my sister home. The lease negotiation took 2 weeks. The final agreement? 30-year lease, $120,000 annually adjusted for inflation. Additional royalties, residents guaranteed rates 25% below market, 20% of revenue into community fund. When I signed Clara Elizabeth Thornhill at the bottom, my hand was steady. The county treasurer handed me a check for $120,000. That evening, B organized celebration at the diner. Finn raised his coffee. To stubborn granddaughters who don't know when to quit. The next morning, I called the family lawyer Silas recommended. I want to file for guardianship of my sister. The process took 8 weeks. Social worker Linda Martinez visited 3 times, inspecting the home, reviewing finances, interviewing both of us. The hearing was in early July. Judge Patricia Ewan reviewed Linda's report. Miss Thornhill, you've demonstrated remarkable initiative. However, you're 19 with no parenting experience. Why should I believe you're prepared to raise an adolescent girl? I stood. Because I know what it's like to be her. I know what it's like to wonder if anyone will choose you. I can't promise perfection, but I can promise Rosie will never question whether someone is fighting for her. Judge Ewan turned to Linda. Your assessment? Miss Thornhill has exceeded expectations. The home is safe,
income is stable, the bond is genuine. I recommend granting provisional guardianship with quarterly check-ins. The judge made notes. I'm granting provisional guardianship effective immediately.
Conditions: quarterly visits for 1 year, monthly check-ins for 6 months, family counseling twice monthly. If conditions are met, I'll convert to permanent guardianship after 1 year. The gavel fell. The drive to Cedar Valley to pick up Rosie felt endless and too short. When I pulled into the parking lot, she was waiting with her bag. The drive back took 2 hours. When we turned onto Thornhill Ridge Road, she sat up straighter. Almost there. The truck climbed the dirt track. Then we were pulling into the clearing. The hut gleamed in afternoon sun. Rosie climbed out slowly. "This is it?" "This is it." I came to stand beside her. "I know it's not what you drew. It's better. Because it's real. Because you built it. Because we're here together." We stood on the porch, then together walked inside. 6 months later, winter had come. Snow lay thick, and smoke from our wood stove rose steady into December air. Rosie sat at her desk doing homework, occasionally sketching. She'd joined art club and discovered talent for watercolors. I worked at the kitchen table on business management coursework. Duke lay by the wood stove, coat glossy and healthy now. The quarterly check had arrived that morning. More than we needed, and 20% went into the community fund that had just purchased new computers for the elementary school. I stood and walked to the window. Dees joined me, sliding under my arm. "You okay?" "Just thinking about how different everything is." "Do you ever regret not selling?" I thought honestly. "Sometimes I wonder. But then I look at this, at us, at what we've built, and I know I made the right choice. Grandpa Gus would be proud. I think so." I looked down at the foundation beneath our feet. He gave us the foundation. We just built on it. That night my phone buzzed. "Martha. Final paperwork came through. Judge Ewan signed permanent guardianship. It's official." I sat on the porch with Duke at my feet, stars burning cold above the clearing. "Thank you," I whispered. To Grandpa Gus, to everyone who'd helped, to whatever allowed 19-year-old girls to build lives from almost nothing. Tomorrow we'd celebrate Christmas with our chosen family. Next week, sledding behind Bee's house. In spring, Finn would help build a greenhouse. The future stretched out, no longer terrifying, but full of possibility. Built on a foundation that had held through threats and delays and inspections. Built on water flowing steady beneath our feet. Resource and responsibility, and reminder that some things were worth fighting for. I looked at the clearing one more time. The hut stood solid against winter darkness. Not beautiful in conventional sense, but beautiful in the way things are when they're exactly what they need to be. Grandpa Gus had been right. Everything started with the foundation, and the foundation he'd given me had held. I stepped inside, locked the door, and began banking the fire for night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, but tonight, in this home we'd created from rust and faith and stubborn refusal to give up, we were exactly where we needed to be. Together. Safe. Home.